My name is Mike Brown, pronouns he, him, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Hilltop Educator Institute, the professional development and community outreach arm of Hilltop Children's Center, a Reggio-inspired preschool on the traditional lands of the Duwamish tribe, the first people of what is now known by colonizers as Seattle, Washington. As a professional development institute focused on anti-racism, equity, and social justice, we have to constantly examine ourselves, our programs, and actively eliminate barriers to learning so we can all benefit from the knowledge and rich experiences of others. Over the course of the years, we've listened, we've reflected, and now we're responding to the calls of our friends in Tennessee, Indiana, DC, New Mexico, Canada, and more to make our offerings more accessible. So, welcome to our newest segment called Community Voices. Now, despite being short in minutes, these segments pack a powerful punch. They're rich in knowledge from leaders within the field, and best of all, they're free. So grab a pen, share with a friend, and as Hilltop Core Values says, let's learn in relationship with each other. So thank you, Jen Bosenberg, for joining us today, this morning. I'll just start by introducing yourself, who you are, where you're from, your pronouns.
Sure. My name is Jen Bosenberg, she, her, and I am from Kids Quest Children's Museum. I'm the education program coordinator there, and I've been there for about 6 years now. So, yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us. I guess I'm going to call this topic Nurturing Innovation and Creativity. I spent a long time thinking of that last night. But we're just going to jump straight into it. So you work at Kids Quest Children's Museum, which is a children's museum, obviously, that really focuses on STEM. So
Yes.
I'm going to start right there. STEM is such a buzzword, and I guess many of us can define it, yet it's kind of quite hard for us to name it in action.
Yeah.
So I want to start by saying, how does Kids Quest Children's Museum, your industry, and your community define STEM, and how can you just, or can you describe how it looks in real time?
Yeah, so I think STEM is primarily used in formal education. We at Kids Quest talk a lot about STEAM and adding art into it to try to get that creativity a little bit more than STEM, I guess. And we use it really in everything we do in some capacity. So in my classes, a lot of the time, I will use different activities to do different concepts. Like, I mean, we could talk about color mixing, for example, right? We're looking at science, we're looking at art, we can even look at math by doing some counting. So really, we use these in a multitude of activities, but sometimes STEM itself, I think, can be kind of hard to identify. But we really try to work off of a STEAM model a little bit more than STEM, I guess.
Perfect. So when I hear color mixing, I think about cause and effect, scientific inquiry, art, color recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that you said
Right.
that, because I think that's so interesting. And I kind of have two follow-up questions from that one. So when we talk about art, do you literally mean paint and crayons? Because that's the first thing that comes to my mind, right? And also,
Yeah.
what role does art play in fostering STEM or STEAM?
Yeah. Yeah, so it can mean crayons and markers and paint. That's kind of where my mind goes to. But when we design the activities, we try to give materials that are a little more open-ended and open for interpretation. So typically, I wouldn't ever set out just, crayons and paper. Here you go. I would maybe put out crayons with watercolor and experiment with them together and how they kind of can play off each other and compare and contrast those materials. Or if we're going for more of like a hands-on approach, I've given them crayons and heat guns before, We talk about melting and the states of matter and different properties and things like that. So it can definitely be your typical crayons, markers, paint. We use those all the time. Um, but it's really open for interpretation, and art is so broad. I think the main concept is that we're trying to give a more creative outlet to explore STEM concepts rather than just adding art as its own separate box, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when I'm thinking about our field of education, because a lot of people don't actually think of museums as a part of education, but you are very much an important piece of what we do in terms of educating and working in partnership with families. So when I think about our field in general, sometimes we call it inquiry-based learning, and
Hmm.
sometimes we call it STEM or STEAM. And for me, I tend to use it interchangeably, but is there a difference?
I think inquiry-based learning is essentially just letting kids guide their own learning, which to me is what STEM can mean. I know that there's a lot of different interpretations of what STEM can mean, but essentially we just want to develop those inquiry skills um, rather than just learning and evaluating what they're doing, rather letting them guide their own learning and think about what these different things can mean in the future. So, I mean, at Kids Quest, we talk a lot about play-based learning. It's kind of our overarching thing we talk about all the time. And basically just letting them guide their own learning and make the activity that we're doing useful to them in whatever that may mean,
Gotcha.
whatever capacity. Yeah.
And it wasn't until recently that I began to think of IBL or inquiry based learning really as an opportunity to center equity in early learning. So, in early learning, just kind of early childhood settings in general. So, how can we use inquiry based learning to move away from a culture of like the evaluation culture, right? And toward
Hmm.
a culture of inquiry and growth?
Yeah. So inquiry-based learning really is just teaching them skills that are useful long term, like problem solving and resilience and critical thinking. And so by setting out the materials with no really intent, like no intention of evaluation of an end goal, um, they're more free to explore at their own pace. So if they are just experimenting with the material for the first time, they can do that in whatever way they need to. If they've used this material over and over again, they can kind of dig a little bit deeper. So our team at Kids Quest really just has the goal of evaluating if they're learning the skill, but also that they're learning lots of life skills, I guess, along the way by asking more open-ended questions, uh, giving clear guidelines if you need clear guidelines, but for the most part, letting them kind of experiment on their own. So, for example, we use a lot of like Play-Doh and beads and different things that can put in it. And so I may set it out with the intention of counting or sorting or whatever intention I have. But I mean, you work with kids all day long. You know that they're going to do 1,000 other things with it. So it's exciting to watch and kind of let them guide their own learning because if I want them to practice counting, that's great. But if they want to sit there and make patterns all day long, that's just as useful. So letting them kind of explore at their own pace more so and let them develop their skills in their own way.
Mm. And not to age myself too much here, right? I just had a birthday, but very rarely um, do we have activities or materials to help facilitate our learning growing up, right?
Hmm.
I remember growing up and my parents being so skeptical of play-based learning, inquiry-based learning, and for some families, mostly Black, Brown, Indigenous, refugee, immigrant communities, this kind of still holds true. And when you really think about it in the grand scheme of things, you're pulling in the glaring reminders of cultural racism and the assimilation of white culture. So for
Hmm.
the parents, guardians, adults with young children who believe that children have to make the active volcanoes or fill out the worksheets to be engaging in STEM and inquiry-based learning, I want to attempt to break some of that thinking here with this next question.
Mhm.
So, my question to you is, what does the exploration of kind of like these exciting foundations of inquiry based learning in science, technology, arts, engineering, math, what does it look like in 2020 and beyond?
So I totally understand the logic behind all of that, right? I worked in a first grade classroom for a couple years, so I understand the worksheets and the evaluation and the physical representation of what a child is learning. But I've also now in the world of informal education learned so much about all the research that goes into what is best for their development long term, and found that the inquiry based way of learning rather than the evaluation um, really helps in so many different ways than we realize maybe all the time. So focusing on developing skills, not so much perfecting them. So I want to work on their counting skills, work on all of these, science and technology and engineering skills, but I am not so much worried about perfecting them because I have no doubt that that will develop and come in the future. But I am more worried about making sure that they are able to think for themselves and problem solve and just be resilient and keep trying. So I think those are more so the skills, especially in early learning, that we are working on consistently rather than evaluation.
And so you mentioned you worked in first grade. So by early
Mhm.
learning, you mean birth to about age 9, correct? So,
Mhm.
okay, so these values should still be incorporated in first grade, second grade. We should be less dependent on kind of the prescriptive or the scriptive curriculum.
Yeah. So I think playing with Play-Doh strengthens our hands, right? So then we can read and we can write. And playing with, sinking and floating a bin of water, you're learning cause and effect and inquiry skills and so many other things that will help you later in life. But also, we still need to be thinking about this when they're, in first grade and second grade, because if they can't hold a pencil, right? If their hands aren't developed and they're not strong enough, then I can't expect them to write in third grade if they can't even hold their pencil. So I need to focus on these like fundamental skills a little bit more. And I think they're just much more likely to retain the information about a topic if they're able to kind of explore it at their own pace and guide their learning. And we tend to, at Kids Quest at least, use a lot of the same materials over and over again,
Hmm.
but in lots of different ways to kind of show that there's not just one way to do anything, really. So, I mean, we don't have, well, you don't need at least all the expensive materials and the big projects and things like that um, to learn. So, I'm not so much interested in them being able to remember a fact if they can't remember, you know, why or make some sort of connection outside with
Hmm.
it. And especially with all the STEM concepts, it's important to allow them to kind of try it over and over and over and over again um, and learn if the same thing happens or if something different happens. And if you just let them do it one time, then they're not really learning anything. So, kind of letting them guide their own learning in that way is also very important.
Kind of wish you were my teacher growing up because we had and I struggled with recalling information in school all the time.
I know it's a big thing.
Right, exactly. And I think part of that's because we had these block schedules. You remember
Hmm.
having those in school?
Oh yeah.
I'm aging myself. But essentially, for those not familiar out there, it's instead of having, say, each day for 45 minutes, social studies, history, whatever, you had it 2 times a week, but it was for 2 hours.
Hmm.
And I used to think of STEM or STEAM as just that a premeditated, scripted 2 hour block of time focused on one area, focus on the science, focus on technology, focus on art. But
Hmm.
since kind of entering this field of early childhood education and working with young children, I've really shifted my thinking and really shifted it to come to learn that STEM is everywhere. So, so what are ways we can infuse STEM into our art lessons or STEAM into our history lessons? and ways we can infuse STEAM when we're just hanging out at home, since we're doing a lot of that right now, watching TV or going out for a walk or whatever that may be.
So yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, STEM is truly, it's everywhere and everything. So for example, in a lot of my early learning classes, like I said, I'll put out the same things or something similar each week with a sign that will tell the adults what we're focusing on this week.
Mm.
So I use a lot of, like, we'll talk about baking soda and vinegar, right? So maybe one week we'll talk about cause and effect and what's happening. The next week we'll talk about fine motor skills, so dropping the vinegar into the baking soda. And then we can talk about counting, and then we can talk about color mixing by adding colors to it. So we're just kind of building and building and building. Um, and I think using, a similar activity that then allows for that repetition, which is super important. And we can learn a ton of different skills just by using one thing. So in terms of activities that are using STEM concepts, we can use kind of a similar thinking. So we can take a painting activity and learn about cause and effect or creativity or patterning or color recognition or hand-eye coordination. There's a lot of different things that can go into it. And the main idea at Kids Quest that we talk about a lot in STEAM is working on collaboration and teamwork and critical thinking. And again, all of these skills that are just really important kind of as you go through your entire life. And we had been working on this for a while, but now, especially now that everyone's kind of cooped up in their houses all day, we have made a lot of videos of things you can do at home. So now that we're in our houses, right? So I'm at my house right now. I'm looking around my house trying to think of things families can use that they have in their house that we, might not have at the museum because we have access to a lot of different things. So using different materials and things like that. So if you're, walking in a park, we've done an activity of collecting leaves and other natural materials, and then you can sort them, and you can create a habitat, and then you can create art, and then you can engineer with them. You can stack the rocks. So there's lots of different things you can do with materials that you have at your house. So we've been really working on trying to develop a way to communicate that to the world.
All right, so you say you've been working on these home videos. So where and how can we access these videos?
So they are currently on our YouTube page, our Kids Quest YouTube page. And then they're also on Instagram. So on YouTube, we have ones that are a little bit longer that maybe require not necessarily adult, focus, but there might be a little more of an explanation on what we're doing, or for the older kids, they can kind of do it themselves. And then the ones on Instagram, since they have to be a little bit shorter, they're mostly me quickly grabbing materials and showing you what to do. But there's, a lot of different activities and stuff on there, which is really fun. And then they're also on our Facebook. So really just all of our social media platforms.
Gotcha. And so could we go to your website and you have your social media icons?
Yep.
And what's your website once again?
Kidsquestmuseum.org.
Oh, easy enough. All
Yep.
right. So I want to shift gears just a little bit. I'm really thinking about on a 10,000 feet level.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking about just kind of masculine culture, right? Within a given field can signal that women X, and thank you for sharing your pronouns. You did identify as a woman X. But a lot of our masculine culture within this field can signal that women X don't belong, right?
Mhm.
As someone who identifies as women X, what suggestions do you give to adults out there to empower young femme-identifying individuals and children of color to nurture this innovation, this creativity, and to fuel STEM and inquiry-based learning into early learning? And I guess follow-up to that is, can you think of in terms of what schools, communities, and adults can do at home?
Yeah. So at Kids Quest, we really try to focus on the fact that play is universal, right? It doesn't matter your age or your gender or your race or anything. We just want to empower children to be curious and inquisitive. And then it's important for children, all children, doesn't matter. So as a white woman that's in a field that is predominantly female driven, it
Mm,
can be hard to show children of other genders and races
mhm.
that that there's lots out there. But we at Kids Quest try to make an effort to represent all races and genders, and our main goal is showing that play is universal no matter what. So we do have a male educator, which is, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced it. It can be kind of a shock when some parents walk in and they say, "Oh, you're the preschool teacher." If myself and he are standing in there, they tend to just walk to me and talk to me, and I'll say, "Oh, I'm actually just I was leaving. I was just grabbing something. He's the teacher," and it's kind of oh, okay. Um, but I've never had that problem with a child. If a child walks in, they don't, have that frame of mind, I guess, yet to go in and assume that I am the teacher when there's two adults in there. Um, so we are trying to lead by example and showing that STEM learning and play is for everybody. Uh, and we frequently will try to break those stereotypes and bring in professionals or anyone that we can to show that there are lots of different people in lots of different fields, I guess.
Gotcha. When you meant the field is predominantly female driven, you were talking about early child education, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to clarify. Well, Jen, I definitely appreciate the work you've been doing in making STEAM, play-based learning, inquiry-based learning, a not so scary thing. I think that drives a lot of adults away when really we are naturally inquisitive, we're naturally creative. So I guess, are there any parting words you'd like to share with our viewers or any special shout outs?
Well, I mean, thank you for having me. This was great. I've been getting a lot of emails from my families at work asking, if things they can do at home to make sure they're not falling behind, I guess. And I love giving them ideas and everything, but I just, I feel that everyone's doing so great and children are constantly learning, right? So I don't want any of the parents to feel pressure, I guess, to sit down and give them worksheets and develop all these things for them because they just need to play ultimately. And STEAM concepts are everywhere. Sometimes they can be kind of hard to identify, but they're out there, I promise.
Well, thank you, Jen.
You're welcome. Of course. Thanks for having me.